Well, joining us now to discuss the findings that we've actually spoken about, Nagaraj Adve, a member of Teachers Against the Climate Crisis. We're also joined at this stage by Abinash Mohanty, Sector Head in Climate Change and Sustainability at IP Global. Thanks very much for being with us. Mr. Adve, let me come to you first. Were these very high temperatures in July also accompanied by extreme weather events in multiple areas of the world?
Yeah, I mean, they were. I mean, the underlying reason, in a sense, for this extreme temperature, which we've seen for the last 4 months, is simply the fact the enormous amount of heat that these various greenhouse gases trap. And that rate is staggering. It's that if you think of it in terms of the energy of one Hiroshima bomb, it's about 5 or 6 Hiroshima bombs every second. So in a half-an-hour program, the greenhouse gases trap the equivalent of 9,000 Hiroshima bombs, or about 500,000 every single day. And that is year after year after year. In addition to that, there are the factors that you just mentioned. There's the El Nino, which brings up heat from the oceans. And there are also a couple of other feedbacks. The less Antarctica ice that you mentioned also then results in less reflection and therefore trapping heat. And there are other sort of multiple such feedbacks. Much of the intense extreme heat goes into the oceans, which in a sense contributes to greater moisture. And that is in a sense contributing to the kind of extreme rainfall and other events that we are seeing not just in various parts of India, but in many parts of the world. So in place after place after place, there is extreme rainfall, hundreds of millimeters of rainfall in a single day. So it's a combination of both extreme heat and extreme rainfall, exacerbated in many places across the Himalaya by a kind of sort of maldevelopment that you all have discussed in your channel quite often before. But my point is that it's a very complex system that we are interfering with. It's a combination of the underlying thing is global warming, then there's the El Nino, and then there are feedbacks which are adding to the warming, like less Antarctic ice, like forest fires in Canada, which means more CO2 trapping more heat. And then there's the factor which is being debated, which is lower aerosol pollutants in the atmosphere. And the less pollutants you have, there's less reflection, which may be trapping more heat, which has possibly been happening since 2012. So it's a series of complex factors, of which some are very, very robust.
Abinash, is there a sense that now that we are getting these new weather records, it's quite possible that we see many more months with record temperature highs?
Good evening, Vishnu, and good evening, Nagaraj. Unfortunately, what we are witnessing is something that has been kind of warned, predated. A couple of decades before, scientists have been warning that there would be a 2-degree, 3-degree temperature rise, and we were kind of understanding them that this might happen or is a distant time affair. But what was a distant time and space affair is now barging onto our lives and livelihood. We have got tennis ball sizes of hailstorms hitting Italy at one part, and then we have got kind of Greece, which has been endured with heat waves. What Nagaraj also suggested, that the ocean temperature is increasing. Similar kind of inferences have been drawn across Spain's coastal belt. So all of these are kind of joining or connecting the dots that climate change is going to be more harsher, more grimmer. More importantly, it is going to breach its thresholds. That's what is point number one. Then, if it is going to breach the thresholds, how is it going to impact us, impact the lives, livelihood, economies, and more importantly, the infrastructures, when the world is actually aspiring, the developing countries like us are aspiring to become the global hub, economic hubs, how climate change is going to impact us. So probably there is a mismatch between the rate at which climate is changing and the fast evolving risk landscape vis-a-vis to what exactly our action speed has been. I'll give you a very small example of what has happened. A couple of weeks before, we had a G20 meeting where there was a lot of contention between the G20 countries who are effectively kind of contributing 45% to the global emissions, and to come into a consensus of phasing out coal. So these are some of the fast kind of evolving risk landscape which is not adhered or which is not converging at our climate actions. And at the same time, there are some abrupt climate actions which are going on. China is trying to alter the weather pattern. US is trying to block the sun's insolation so that it can become a cold shade. These are some of the examples, right? Which are kind of very skeptical examples, very scary examples, because we don't have empirical evidence. And what we, in IPCC's term, we call it as a maladaptation. It is actually going to be maladaptation and going to backfire us in a larger extent, because we are trying to find out quick fixes rather than having more endured solutions which are scientifically proven, more importantly, which is aimed at climate proofing of lives and livelihood. Yeah, Vishnu.
Nagraj, could you just tell us a little bit more about the weather, what we are seeing in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand now, extreme rainfall, flooding, the loss of lives? Is this linked to climate change?
So it needs an attribution study to conclusively prove whether a specific extreme event is connected to climate change. So this is a recent branch of science which goes back about 9 or 10 years. And having said that, it seems very likely that there's a connection between the extreme heat being trapped that I mentioned earlier, the fact that over 90% of it goes into the oceans, resulting in a warmer ocean, warmer moisture, supplying more moisture when the conditions are right. So there is a very likely connection as far as extreme rainfall goes. As far as extreme heat goes, the connection is far more robust. And this has been shown in year after year in studies that are published each year in a bulletin that's published from America called BAMS, where extreme heat events of the kind we saw earlier in March, that we saw last year in China, that we saw this year in China, those connections are far more robust. The thing is that, like you mentioned, you asked the question about going forward. The previous two super El Niños in 1997 and 2015, the following year after that, in 1998 and 2016, suggested that the quarter of the following year gets extremely hot. So we can expect warmth going forward into Jan, February and March, April, etc. And the social impacts are, in a sense, not just in Himachal, but across the range. But I would draw your attention to two kinds of impacts. One that we don't often discuss or think about, which is the impact on other species. Across the Himalayan range, from Himachal Pradesh across the range. So in Himachal Pradesh, it is, say, apples that are now higher. In Uttarakhand, the study has shown that trees are now 1,000 feet higher. In the eastern Himalayas, shown that, in fact, a study by a colleague of mine in the teachers group has shown that birds are higher by around 1,000 meters. And we're talking of dozens of species. In the oceans, because the oceans are getting warmer, across the Kerala coast, there were key species, sardines and mackerel, that used to be found across the Kerala coast. They are now 650 kilometers further north because of warming oceans. And they can be found along Gujarat. Along the eastern coast, they used to be near Tamil Nadu and further south. Now they've gone beyond Orissa and they've reached Bengal. So this is the just one kind of impact on species called shifts in species range. Right. And there are other kinds of impacts, changes in the timing of their life cycle, what's called phenological events, or even just heat stress. It's like you and I face heat stress. Even animals do. Cows do. They get ill, their milk yields fall, they die. There are all kinds of impacts on other species. In fact, there was one study by BNHS which said that 65,000 birds died in just one extreme rainfall event. Now, is that being studied in Himachal?
That's just absolutely crazy. And, I mean, it is so frightening because this is all upon us. Look, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you both very much, for speaking to me. And, you do know that this is a topic that I'm going to be tracking very, very closely. We've always done that at NDTV.